A violent flash lit up the desert sky. Grant's daughter screamed as the alien ship came crashing down not 50 feet from their rover. The shockwave knocked tools off his workbench, sand blasted against the window, and the eerie hum of unfamiliar tech filled the air. Grant Henderson, a retired planetary fleet mechanic turned frontier junk fixer, blinked at the smoke rising outside his small workshop. He had seen ships crash before, but none like this one. He grabbed his tool belt with one hand and his daughter AA with the other. "Stay close," he said, not knowing if he was talking to her or himself. They approached the wreckage cautiously. It hadn't exploded. Yet, a good sign. But the scorched crater and the sleek alien hull spoke of a ship that didn't belong on this dust-choked moon. Not out here, in a forgotten sector where only smugglers and ghosts roamed. Then he saw her. Tall, regal, alive. She was pulling herself out of the broken hull, her skin a pale violet that shimmered under the rising twin suns. Her bodysuit was torn, singed, yet somehow still elegant. Her movements were sharp, trained, but slow, pained. She clutched her side and scanned the terrain with wide, alert eyes. Her gaze landed on Grant, then on the little girl clutching his leg. He raised both hands instinctively. Hey now, we're not a threat." The alien woman narrowed her eyes, lips parted slightly in disbelief. She staggered toward them, but before she could speak, AA wriggled free and ran up to her. "Your ship fell real hard," the toddler said, holding out a dusty half-charged energy module. "Want to see my tools?" The woman blinked, then, shockingly, smiled. It was a hesitant, guarded smile, but it softened something behind her sharp features. She crouched painfully, extended a long-fingered hand, and touched the device AA offered, like it was a sacred relic. Grant let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. "I'm Grant," he said carefully. "Freelance mechanic, mostly obsolete. That one's AA. She likes fixing things she's not supposed to touch." The woman stood slowly. "I am Alera Novath," she said, "and I did not mean to land here." "Didn't look like much of a landing," he muttered, eyeing the thruster wreckage. "You've got fuel lines split, one stabilizer cooked, and I'm betting your diagnostics are throwing tantrums." Alera arched an eyebrow. "You speak engineering." Grant shrugged. "I speak survival. You're lucky you didn't break orbit over hard terrain." "I was being pursued," she said. That made him pause. "Pursued by who?" She hesitated. "People who want something I carry. People who won't stop until they get it." The air around them grew still. He looked down at his daughter, then up at the stranger. "Well, I'm not much for politics or running, but I am pretty decent at keeping things from falling apart. Ships, people, you name it." She tilted her head, measuring him. "You would help a stranger?" Grant smirked. "Lady, you fell out of the sky onto my property. You broke half my fence. You're already my problem." That earned a short laugh. Not a real one, but a beginning. He knelt beside the wreck, already pulling out a scanner. "All right, Princess Crash Landing. Let's see if we can get you off my lawn in one piece." She didn't correct him, but the look she gave him, sharp, unreadable, told him Princess might not be far off. For the first time in months, as twin suns rose and cast long shadows across broken metal and dry sand, Grant felt something stir deep inside him. Something that felt a lot like the beginning of trouble, the good kind. It started with a silence. Not the tense, awkward kind, but the strange kind that exists when two people who shouldn't be working together somehow are. Grant worked quietly beneath the half-mangled thruster, sweat beading down his temples as he calibrated the manual intake ports. Alera stood nearby, arms crossed, observing with an intensity that made him hyper-aware of every move he made. She hadn't said much since they dragged what was salvageable of the ship under his shade tarp. Just the occasional technical term, a precise hand gesture, or the subtle twitch of her jaw when he jury-rigged something in a way she clearly disagreed with. "That's not how we usually reroute stabilizer flow," she finally said, her tone clipped but curious. Grant didn't look up. "Out here we don't do usual. We do whatever works and doesn't blow up in your face." There was a pause. Then, unexpectedly, she gave a soft that almost sounded like amusement. "You're improvisational," she said. "Crude, but efficient." He smirked. "I'll take that as a compliment, Princess Sparkplug." She turned toward him slowly. "That's not my title." "No?" He squinted up at her. Because you sure carry yourself like someone who owns a moon or two. Her expression flickered, just for a second, as if he'd touched on something too close to the truth. But instead of retreating, she walked over and crouched beside him, studying the crude circuit web he'd created from salvaged wire and repurposed alloy strips. I wouldn't have thought to do this, she admitted quietly. It's unorthodox. You mean ugly, he said, grinning. I mean effective, she replied, then added after a beat. And yes, ugly. That made him laugh, short, surprised, genuine. She didn't laugh with him, but her violet eyes softened. Just a bit. By midday, they were both covered in grime and sweat. Grant tried to stay professional, mostly because he hadn't worked next to a woman in years, let alone an alien one with dangerous eyes and a strange, magnetic calm. But it wasn't easy, especially when she started handing him tools before he asked for them. Accurately, every time. You memorizing my habits? He asked, raising an eyebrow. Your gestures are predictable, she replied. That's flattering. In a stalkerish kind of way. I observe. It's part of my training. What kind of training? Alera hesitated. Strategic survival. Crisis response. Ship engineering. Grant wiped his forehead with the back of his hand. That's a long list for someone who looks like they've never changed a fuel filter. I've done more than you think, she said, eyes narrowing, but there was no heat in it. More like quiet pride. Fair enough, he said, holding out a busted module. Can you rewire this port with reversed polarity? She didn't answer. She just took it, flipped it over in one hand, and got to work. 15 seconds later, she handed it back. Fixed. Grant blinked. Okay. Color me impressed. Alera looked away, almost shy. It's just physics. No, he said slowly. It's instinct and precision. You're good. She met his gaze. So are you. There was something raw in that exchange. Quiet, charged, a moment suspended in the dust and static between them. Then AA burst out of the shelter, arms full of bolts. Dad! I made a tower! The tension broke, and they both turned. The little girl beamed with pride at her rickety, swaying sculpture of spare parts. Alera tilted her head and studied it like it was a miniature alien monument. It lacks balance, she said solemnly. I know, AA replied, but it's fun. Alera blinked. Grant chuckled. You'll get used to her logic. She runs on joy, not symmetry. Alera didn't reply, but a faint smile tugged at her lips. As the stars began to peek through the dusky sky, and the patched-up thruster hummed faintly under test conditions, something shifted between the two adults. Not quite friendship, not quite alliance. Something beginning. The storm rolled in like a living beast. Dark clouds twisted across the horizon, snarling with violet lightning that cracked the sky in jagged veins. The atmosphere on this desert moon had been unstable for hours, but now it was collapsing into full-blown chaos. Grant tightened the stabilizer bolts on the landing struts, cursing under his breath. The wind screamed around the hull of Alera's ship, dust hammering every exposed panel like shrapnel. His daughter, AA, was huddled inside a makeshift pod he'd built from salvage, her toy clutched tight in both hands. We need to move the auxiliary panels before the sand gets into the propulsion sockets, he shouted over the gale. I'm aware, Alera snapped back, already kneeling near the portside access hatch, her hair whipping around her face like a silver flame. But if we lose control of the fusion coolant flow, you won't, he interrupted, sliding next to her. Not if I reroute it through the secondary chamber. Just buy me 30 seconds. She hesitated, then nodded. He dove under the ship, sparks lighting his face as he pried open a maintenance conduit. His hands moved with practiced ease, even as dust stung his eyes. Behind him, he heard the faint hum of the ship's power core engaging. Alera was doing her part, trusting him to do his. That trust did something to Grant. It hit deeper than he expected. He twisted the final valve and shouted, "Try it now!" The ship gave a low mechanical growl. Lights flickered, then stabilized. The thruster mount settled, fusion containment aligned. Alera's voice crackled through the comm. It's holding. We've got stabilization at 63%. He exhaled, crawling out from under the ship just as another bolt of lightning struck nearby, shaking the ground. She was waiting, panting slightly, her face streaked with grime and sweat. He looked at her, really looked at her. Her jaw was tight with focus, but her eyes, they were glowing with something else. You good? he asked. I'm functional, she replied. But her voice had softened. They turned in unison toward the ridge, where a scavenger drone now hovered, its crimson sensor sweeping the camp. Friend of yours? Grant muttered, already reaching for his sidearm. I don't have friends that shoot on sight, Alera replied, lifting her own weapon in a smooth, practiced motion. The drone darted left, then opened fire. Bolts of plasma scorched the dirt as they ducked for cover. Grant returned fire, aiming high to draw the drone's attention while Alera sprinted across the sand, flanking it with pinpoint accuracy. She fired. Once. The shot struck the stabilizer node, and the drone crashed into the dust in a shower of sparks. Silence fell. Grant stood slowly. That, he said, was some elite-level sharpshooting. I trained for a decade with the Imperial Guard, she replied, brushing sand from her sleeve. He blinked. You were a princess. She ignored that. We need to relocate. If that drone pinged our location, more will follow. Grant nodded, adrenaline still surging. Help me with the shelter. We can move it closer to the ridge. The stone will block the worst of the wind. They worked without another word, hands moving in practiced rhythm. They were no longer strangers. They were a team. As they finished anchoring the last support beam, AA peeked out from her pod. Is the sky angry? Grant laughed. A little, but we're angrier. Alera raised an eyebrow. That logic is flawed, but oddly inspiring. He chuckled. Stick with us, Your Highness. We specialize in flawed inspiration. Her lips twitched. I'm starting to see that. They stood there side by side, staring out at the approaching storm. The air smelled of ozone and grit, the wind howling like some ancient ghost. And yet, between the shared exhaustion and the flickering glow of the ship's stabilizers, something unspoken passed between them. A respect forged not in words, but in fire, sweat, and stormlight. And something else. Something that might become more than survival. The storm had passed, leaving behind a strange stillness. Grant sat by the fire pit, legs crossed, AA asleep in his lap, her head tucked beneath his chin. The stars blinked above like ancient eyes, and the hum of the ship's systems was a comforting whisper in the background. Across from him, Alera sat quietly, her gaze fixed on the flickering flames. For a while, neither of them spoke. It wasn't an awkward silence, just one filled with the weight of shared survival. Finally, Grant broke it. You don't talk much about where you're from. Alera didn't look at him, but her eyes softened. There's not much to say that would make sense to someone from the frontier. Try me, he said gently. She hesitated, then spoke, her voice low and careful. My world is marble towers and artificial gravity gardens, elegance, order, and 1,000 rules designed to keep people in their place. Grant chuckled. Sounds fancy and exhausting. It is, she admitted, and for the first time he heard something fragile beneath the steel in her voice. I was bred for diplomacy, strategy, optics. My choices were illusions, controlled variables. He raised an eyebrow. And now? Now, she said, finally meeting his eyes. I'm stranded with a stubborn mechanic and his fearless little girl who believes a busted thruster is a playground. It's unexpected. He grinned. Unexpected's kind of my specialty. Alera smiled, just a flicker, but it was real. Grant gently shifted AA and laid her on a thermal blanket nearby, then turned fully toward Alera. The firelight painted soft lines on her face, highlighting the subtle shimmer of her skin. What about you? She asked suddenly. Your daughter. Her mother isn't here. A long pause. No, Grant said quietly. She died during a supply run. Wrong place, wrong time. Alera inhaled, visibly surprised. I'm sorry. He shrugged, but his eyes were distant. I thought I'd fall apart. But then there was this tiny person who needed me more than I needed to grieve. So I built things, fixed things, just kept moving. You survived, Alera said. I endured, he corrected. I didn't start living again until today, until I saw her laughing in the sand, trying to hand you a power module. The silence returned, but it was warmer this time. Shared pain had created something new between them, an intimacy built not on romance but understanding. I've never been around children, Alera admitted. I was trained, not raised. Well, you're doing better than most, Grant said. She trusts you. That means something. Alera tilted her head. She trusts you more. Grant's mouth twitched. Yeah, I bribe her with candy. Alera laughed. Not a diplomatic laugh, not restrained. It was sudden, bright, and startled even her. She caught herself mid-chuckle, covering her mouth. That was undignified, she said. That was perfect, he replied. For a long moment, they sat there, watching each other across the fire. Something shifted. The wall between them, once thick with formality and cultural distance, had started to crumble. Grant reached into his pack and pulled out a small music device. Ever heard Earth music? Alera arched an elegant eyebrow. Only theoretical references. He tapped a few buttons. A soft melodic tune drifted into the air, an old folk ballad with strings and low harmonies. Alera's eyes widened. It's raw, unpolished, but honest. That's the point. She closed her eyes, letting the music wash over her. For a moment, she didn't look like a princess or a soldier, just a woman, sitting in the quiet after a storm, letting herself feel. Grant watched her, heart thudding just a bit too fast. You know, he said, I think I'm starting to believe this ship didn't just crash by accident. Alera opened her eyes. You think the universe has a plan? He shrugged. I think sometimes broken things fall into place. She looked at him for a long time. Then, slowly, she nodded. I hope you're right. And under the stars, without ceremony or promise, trust bloomed, quietly, fiercely, irrevocably. Grant had always found comfort in schematics. Even when his life spiraled into chaos, dead thrusters, royal fugitives, mercenaries on their tail, there was a kind of serenity in tracing lines on a datapad and making sense of the mess. Tonight was no different. The interior lights of Alera's starcruiser dimmed to a warm amber as the two of them hunched over the projection table. A full schematic of the ancient structure hovered between them, multiple levels, shield nodes, and a central command chamber. This is where they're holding your father, Grant said, pointing to a glowing dot pulsing inside the fortress's core. Probably behind biometric locks and enough firepower to hold off a fleet. Alera nodded, her jaw tight. He'll be guarded by loyalists of House Marenthos. They're brutal, but predictable. If we trigger their sensor grid, they'll route reinforcements to the southern wing, leaving the north hallway vulnerable. Grant tapped a few more commands, overlaying drone scan data. Good. Then we time the breach from the eastern air vent, small enough that only 2 people can slip through. Bastion's team handles external chaos. We go in quiet. She looked at him, impressed. You've done this before. Something like it, he admitted. But it was a lot messier, and fewer alien princesses involved. That earned him the ghost of a smile. A moment passed, just long enough for their fingers to brush as they both reached to zoom the map. The touch was light, but neither of them pulled away immediately. Alera's voice softened. Why are you helping me, Grant? Beyond survival, beyond duty. He looked up. Because someone has to believe in you, and because maybe I want you to win, not just escape. Win. The air between them tightened with unsaid emotions. Then the proximity alarm beeped, breaking the moment. Grant stepped back, pulling himself into focus. Bastion's scouts just checked in, he said. They'll disable the sensor net from orbit at 0300. That gives us 6 hours to prep. Alera nodded, businesslike again. I'll recalibrate the pulse weapon. You handle the access codes. They worked in tandem, a seamless rhythm forming between them. Words were minimal. Trust had replaced explanation. At one point, AA padded into the room, bleary-eyed and dragging her favorite plushie. She climbed onto Grant's lap without a word. He continued typing with one hand, resting the other protectively over her. Alera glanced up, her eyes softening. She's lucky to have you. She saved me. Not the other way around, he said quietly. Silence again. Not heavy, just full. They continued planning into the early hours, the faint hum of the ship and the blinking of consoles their only soundtrack. They didn't need declarations. Not yet. But with every line drawn and every strategy refined, they weren't just planning a rescue. They were building something bigger. A partnership. A future. The fortress loomed like a jagged scar across the barren moon, its high towers pulsing with the cold glow of automated turrets. Grant crouched low behind a twisted support pillar, his daughter AA wrapped tightly in his arms, her tiny body trembling against his chest. The firefight had erupted without warning, What was meant to be a silent extraction had spiraled into a storm of steel and plasma. Alera crouched beside him, her weapon drawn, eyes scanning the smoke-filled corridor. Her jaw was clenched, but not with fear, with fury. "My father's deeper inside," she hissed. "They moved him to a panic vault beneath the west wing. Bastion's team is pinned down." Grant nodded, adrenaline burning through his veins. "We'll need to draw their fire away from the western flank. If we give Bastion even 10 seconds, they might be able to breach the vault." A.A. whimpered softly. He kissed her forehead, whispering, "Stay brave for Daddy, okay?" Then he tucked her behind a crate, handed her his spare comm beacon set to silent pulse, and turned to Alera. "I've got a jamming device from the shuttle. Might scramble their auto-targeting just long enough." "Are you sure?" she asked, worry flickering in her violet eyes. "No," he said, smirking. "But that's never stopped me before." They moved in sync, Alera silent and graceful, Grant with measured, focused strides. They flanked the corridor's edge as alarms shrieked above them. Sparks cascaded from a shattered bulkhead. 2 turret units rotated toward them. "Now!" Grant shouted, hurling the jammer across the corridor. It beeped once, twice. Then a burst of static filled the air. The turrets sputtered and froze, confused by the false targeting data. Alera dashed forward, firing precise shots at the emitter nodes. One turret exploded in a blaze of sparks, and the other deactivated entirely. "Go!" she yelled. They burst into the inner chamber. Bastion's team was hunkered down behind debris. One man lay bleeding, another fired wildly around a corner. "You brought the cavalry?" Bastion grunted as he saw them. "Just the B team," Grant quipped, kneeling beside the console that led to the panic vault's override. "Cover me. I can break the encryption, but I need 90 seconds. "You have 40, Bastion shot back grimly. Alera took a defensive stance at the corridor mouth, unleashing a storm of blaster fire toward incoming hostiles. Her movements were fluid, each shot deliberate. She wasn't just royalty, she was trained for war. Grant spared her a glance, and something tightened in his chest. She wasn't fighting just for duty anymore. She was fighting for something personal. Beside him, the override panel resisted his every attempt. "Damn encryption's nested," he muttered, fingers flying across the interface. They locked this tighter than a war chest. A blast shook the wall behind them. Bastion's man went down with a scream. Alera ducked and rolled, her sidearm hitting the floor. Another enemy charged in. "Grant!" she yelled. He didn't look up. "Almost there!" The override beeped. A green light flashed. "Vault unlocked!" Grant roared. Alera didn't hesitate. She sprinted into the corridor, blaster reclaimed mid-dive. Grant followed, heart hammering in his chest. They reached the vault door just as it hissed open. Inside stood an older man, her father, tall but visibly weakened, his robes torn, his face gaunt. Recognition flickered in his eyes. "Alera." She stumbled forward and wrapped him in a tight embrace. "I've got you. You're safe now." Grant stood back, eyes scanning the vault for threats. He caught sight of a blinking motion sensor. Not for long," he said. Alera broke the hug. "What?" He pointed. "That's a trigger. We open this vault. We trip their secondary security grid." A siren blared. The whole fortress shuddered. "Time to go," Bastion growled over the comm. Alera slung her father's arm over her shoulder. "Can he walk?" "Barely," the older man whispered, "but I'll try." Grant led them back through the corridor, turrets sputtering, fires raging on both sides. Blasts shook the floor beneath their boots. Somewhere behind them, A.A. cried out. "A.A.!" Grant's voice cracked. He sprinted ahead, weaving through falling debris. She sat curled behind the crate, frightened but unharmed. He scooped her up, clutching her tight. "Got you," he whispered. Alera and her father reached the shuttle ramp just as Grant darted on board with A.A. Bastion's last man dragged a wounded teammate in. They sealed the hatch. "Engine's hot!" Grant yelled, sliding into the co-pilot's chair. Alera set her father down, took the pilot's controls, and punched the throttle. The shuttle roared through the chaos, strafing fire zipping past its hull. Alera navigated like a storm herself, weaving through the defensive grid. They burst out of the fortress gates just as an explosion tore through the eastern wall. "Nice touch," Grant panted. "I had them plant charges on the way in," she said, voice shaking with exhaustion. "If we were going to run, I wanted the place to remember us." As they ascended into the upper atmosphere, the fortress now a smoldering dot behind them, Alera's hand found Grant's. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. The docking bay was quiet as the cruiser touched down on the royal platform, its landing gear hissing against the polished stone. Grant stepped out first. AA nestled in his arms, her eyes wide with wonder at the grandeur. Alera followed behind, supporting her father, whose strength had returned just enough to walk with dignity. They were met by guards loyal to the old regime, still wearing the crest of House Noveth across their chests. When they saw the elder statesman alive, gasps rippled through the formation, knees bent in unison. "My lord," the old man gave a tired nod. "No titles. Not yet." Inside the Grand Hall, the Conspirator Council awaited, surrounded by stern faces, live broadcast drones floating like silent ghosts in the air. The galaxy was watching. Alera stepped forward, tall and regal, her voice cutting through the tense silence like a blade. "The rightful sovereign of our house has returned. You claimed he was dead. You claimed I was missing or defected. Both lies. Today those lies end." One of the conspirators, a gaunt man with silver robes and a too-polished smirk, raised his hand. "This chamber answers to the vote of majority, not inheritance. You have no proof." Before he could finish, Bastion stepped forward, tossing a sleek data drive onto the floor. "Here's proof," he grunted. "Audio and visual recordings of your goons interrogating the Lord Regent, surveillance logs showing you rerouting planetary funds to private security forces. Want me to keep going?" The hall erupted in whispers. Alera's father stood beside her now, eyes sharp despite the ordeal. "I may have been locked away, but I was not blind, and I certainly wasn't alone." He looked to Grant, who stood quietly at the side, AA now dozing on his shoulder. Grant met his eyes and gave a small, respectful nod. The conspirators faltered. Some sat down in shame. Others tried to speak, but the murmurs of the watching crowd had already turned. Justice didn't come in a flash of blaster fire. It came in silence, in the stillness of consequences catching up. Alera pressed forward. "You tried to fracture the unity of our system. For greed. For power. But this family, this name, it stands for more. And now we stand again." One of the guards retrieved the data drive and handed it to the overseer. The verdict came within minutes. The conspirators were stripped of rank, exiled. The moment was not triumphant in the traditional sense. There were no cheers, no fireworks. But there was peace. The kind of peace that settles into bones after years of vigilance. Later, on a sun-drenched terrace overlooking the ocean, Alera approached Grant, her ceremonial robe now replaced with a simple tunic, her hair loose in the breeze. "You never asked for reward," she said softly. "You didn't want glory, but you gave me back my father, my name, my people." Grant chuckled, adjusting AA's blanket. "I was just fixing your ship. You were the one fixing an entire star system." Alera smiled. "We did it together." Their fingers brushed. And though the galaxy was still vast and chaotic for once, a corner of it had been set right. The palace gardens had never smelled sweeter. Weeks had passed since the confrontation in the Grand Hall. Alera had resumed her duties with a calm assurance that radiated from her like the sun off the palace domes. Her father, though still recovering, was often seen smiling again. The crisis had passed, but something deeper was blooming beneath the surface. Grant was in the royal workshop, sleeves rolled up, helping reprogram a malfunctioning drone when Alera appeared in the doorway. She stood quietly for a moment, watching him. He glanced up, caught her gaze, and smirked. "Another sensor blown? I swear these bots sabotage themselves just to get my attention." She smiled faintly, but didn't laugh like she usually would. There was something softer in her expression, something unsure. "I need to talk to you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He wiped his hands and stepped closer, concern knitting his brow. "Everything okay?" "I think so," she murmured. "But I need you to come with me." She led him through a side corridor, away from the usual bustle of advisors and technicians, toward her private quarters. Inside, the room was quiet, bathed in gentle light. A shimmering holo display hovered near the bed, casting diagnostic readings in soft blue glyphs. Alera hesitated, then touched her stomach gently. "I had some strange symptoms. Fatigue, sensitivity. I assumed it was stress." Grant blinked. "You okay?" Should I get a medic? Her eyes met his, wide and vulnerable in a way he'd never seen before. The royal physician already ran the scan. She paused, then handed him the holo display. He stared at the readings, confused, until he saw the highlighted section, pulsing softly with twin heartbeats. A moment passed, then another, and finally, "Wait, is that?" She nodded, voice trembling. "I'm pregnant, Grant, and unless my biology is suddenly rewriting thousands of years of Zarian genetics, the child is yours." Grant stared, speechless, the world momentarily spinning around him. Him, a freelance mechanic from the dustiest corner of the galaxy, about to be a father again, this time with a royal alien woman from another star. "Are you okay with this?" she asked quietly. "You've already done more than anyone could have asked. You didn't sign up for—" He stepped forward, gently cupping her cheek. "Alera, I may not understand half your culture or how this even happened biologically, but this feels right." Tears welled in her eyes. "You're not angry? Scared?" "I'm terrified," he admitted, chuckling through a lump in his throat. "But not of you, not of this. I never imagined I'd find a place where I actually belonged. But you and AA, this life, it feels like home." She wrapped her arms around him, their foreheads touching, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke. The universe outside the window spun on, vast and chaotic. But in that quiet chamber, they had created something small, something perfect, a quiet miracle. The midday sun cast soft golden rays through the crystalline windows of the palace kitchen, illuminating a rather peculiar sight. Grant, shirt half untucked, stood at a marble counter making sandwiches. "I still don't understand," Alera said, arms crossed, watching him with barely concealed amusement. "Why layer vegetables and meat between 2 slices of processed wheat loaf?" He held up a tomato slice like a precious artifact. "Because, Your Radiance, this," he said with mock solemnity, "is a sacred Terran ritual. It's called a sandwich. Ancient, powerful, delicious." AA clapped from the stool beside him. "More peanut butter." "See?" Grant smirked. "The people demand it." Alera narrowed her eyes. "You're aware that my palace chefs have trained for years in molecular gastronomy, right?" "And yet," Grant replied, spreading the peanut butter with exaggerated care, "not a single one of them has ever made AA eat with this much enthusiasm." Alera walked around the counter, inspecting the sandwich assembly station like a general assessing a battlefield. "You know," she murmured, "if the council saw this, they'd question whether you're a culinary anarchist or a genius." Grant grinned. "Why not both?" She chuckled, then leaned down to AA. "So, what makes this so special?" AA paused thoughtfully. "Daddy says sandwiches fix sadness." Alera blinked, then slowly smiled. "Then perhaps we should prepare a diplomatic crate of them. Might solve half the galactic disputes." "Now you're getting it," Grant said, handing her a triangle-cut masterpiece. "Try it." She took a bite cautiously, her expression unreadable. Then her eyes widened. "This is strangely satisfying." He placed a hand over his heart. "You wound me with your surprise." They moved to a sunlit corner of the dining area, AA swinging her legs happily while munching her sandwich, crumbs decorating her lap like royal jewels. Alera sat across from Grant, chewing with unexpected enthusiasm. "Don't tell your chefs," she whispered, "but I want another." "I won't," Grant said, "unless I need leverage in a trade negotiation." She raised an eyebrow. "You're becoming dangerously clever." "I've been fixing alien hyperdrives and raising a toddler. I deserve some perks." Laughter danced between them, easy and warm. In that moment, they weren't a mechanic and a princess. They were just 2 people, 2 parents, finding calm in the cow. The stars outside the viewport shimmered like a slow exhale from the galaxy itself. The cruiser drifted in low orbit above the tranquil oceans of Alera's homeworld, its hull now bearing no scars, only polish, precision, and peace. Grant stood by the glass, AA asleep in his arms, her tiny head nestled against his shoulder. The weight of her was familiar, comforting. It grounded him in a reality that still felt a little surreal. Alera stepped beside him, her footsteps quiet over the marble floor. She wore no crown, no formal robes, just a simple tunic and soft boots. In the pale glow of the stars, she looked less like a galactic princess, and more like someone who'd finally laid her burdens down. "She's growing fast," Alera said softly, gazing at AA. "She is," Grant replied, brushing a strand of hair from his daughter's face. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm keeping up." "You're doing more than that," Alera said. "You saved us all. You anchored a war-torn world with duct tape, grit, and peanut butter sandwiches." Grant chuckled. "That might be the most accurate summary of my career." They stood in silence for a moment, watching the world below rotate slowly. The vastness didn't feel so cold anymore. "She still asks about that first day," Alera murmured. "About the desert, about the sparks." Grant smiled. "She remembers. She remembers everything that matters." A long pause stretched between them, comfortable and unhurried. "I used to think I had to be untouchable," Alera confessed. "That being strong meant being alone." "And now?" Grant asked gently. She looked at him, violet eyes soft. "Now I think strength is knowing when to let someone in." They didn't need grand declarations, no fireworks, just the quiet understanding that something extraordinary had taken root between them. A family. Grant shifted slightly, looking back at the sleeping child, then at Alera. "I never thought fixing a busted thruster would fix me," he said. Alera took his free hand in hers. "It didn't fix you. You did. But I'm glad I was there to watch." Outside, the stars moved on, cold, ancient, endless. Inside, the cruiser was still, whole, and finally, home.